Hey class, in this short video I want to dig in a little bit more into the charges against Socrates. So, as you hopefully by now noticed in your reading, Socrates says that there are two sets of charges against him. There are what he calls the old accusations and the new accusations. The old accusations are, roughly speaking, about 20 years old, and these accusations, Socrates says, basically contributed to his bad reputation. And it's because of his bad reputation that the new accusations are plausible. So his idea in the apology is that before he can address the new accusations, he has to address the old ones that are the source of his bad reputation. So where do these old accusations come from? Well, Socrates cites a very specific source for the old accusations. He says they come from the work of a poet named Aristophanes. And essentially what Socrates is referring to is a play called The Clouds. And The Clouds is a comedy written by Aristophanes about 20 years before the date of Socrates' trial that satirizes Socrates. Socrates is a character in The Clouds, and he's basically sort of a comic villain. And he's running this school, and in this school they're doing stupid, time-wasting studies like trying to figure out how far fleas can jump. Basically silly studies. But more ominously, this Socrates is also depicted by Aristophanes as corrupting the youth. There's another character named Strepsiades who goes to Socrates for education, and the result of Socrates' education is that Strepsiades attacks his own father. Right, so quite literally, Socrates corrupts the youth in the most dramatic fashion possible by teaching Strepsiades to beat his father nearly to death. So what are the charges that Socrates pulls from Aristophanes' play? Well, Socrates says that according to these charges, and this is at 19c, Socrates is guilty of wrongdoing in that he busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. He makes the worse argument into the stronger argument, and he teaches these things to others. And so what does this mean? The investigation of things below the heaven and above the earth has to do not with astronomy and geology or spelunking or anything like that, but is a poetic way of saying that Socrates is sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. He's asking questions about the universe and about reality that are not appropriate for him to ask. Things in the heavens would be the things of the gods, right? Mount Olympus, Zeus. And things below the earth would also be things of the gods, because that's where Hades was said to be. So essentially, Socrates is not respecting the limits of what a human being should ask about, and he's questioning the myths and stories about the gods. Related to this is this claim that he makes the weaker argument the stronger. Again, what does that mean? Imagine two arguments fighting. The weaker one should lose, right? So if I say to you that the sky is green and someone else says the sky is blue, the argument that the sky is blue should be the stronger argument because that's true. But what Aristophanes claims Socrates does is that he makes the weaker argument, the false argument, win in the battle. Right, so essentially Socrates makes things that are not true seem believable. Right, so he leads people to believe things that are not true and to not believe things that are true. Now, if you're paying attention, you're going to say, well, this is a lot like what Socrates was complaining about in the first paragraph. Right, it's almost as if Socrates and Aristophanes are accusing each other of the same thing. And there is an element of that. What Aristophanes thinks of as true, as the stronger argument, is essentially the traditions and customs of Athens and what they say is true or what they say is right. And so when Socrates questions these things, Aristophanes sees him as making the weaker argument, the thing that is counterintuitive or the thing that runs against tradition, seem correct. And so essentially what this accusation is saying is that Socrates is a critic of the traditional customs and ways of Athens. And then finally, that he teaches this to others, right? Which is pretty self-explanatory. That not only does Socrates say and do these things, but he teaches other people how to do it, right? These are the early accusations. And Socrates will then spend a couple pages trying to explain why these different accusations are false. And it's in here that we get the famous story of his friend Chaerephon's visit to the oracle at Delphi that you should all familiarize yourself with. But I'm going to jump up to the new accusations. Right? The new accusations are the ones that are actually sort of posted on the paper that was given to him when he was told to come to court today. This is what he's really on trial for. And these accusations are not believing in the gods of the city, but believing in new and different gods, and corrupting the youth. You can see, I hope, how the new accusations are echoes or modifications of the old accusations, right? Because that's what Socrates wants you to see. No one would think that I'm corrupting the youth if they didn't think that I did these things that Aristophanes describes me doing. I want to dig a little deeper into these accusations as well. Right, so first, not believing in the gods of the city, but believing in new and different gods. The ancient Greeks were polytheists, and they believed in many gods. And if someone believed in a new and different god, it was not unusual to just be like, okay, well, I guess instead of 20 gods, there's 21, whatever. Right, that adding new gods to the pantheon is not in and of itself, let's say, a crime. Right, that happened all the time. They even had a temple to the unknown god in Athens at one point, just in case there was a god out there that they didn't know about. The charge that Socrates doesn't believe in the gods of the city, but believes in new and different gods, the weight doesn't really fall on the new and different part, but in the not believing in the gods of the city part. Right? The problem that Meletus, Antius, and Lycon see is that Socrates rejects the traditional gods of Athens. They want to claim that he rejects Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, all of those guys. Right? That's the problem. It's not so much that he's coming up with something new, but that he seems to be rejecting the gods of Athens. Right? The problem is that he's rejecting the gods of Athens. Why is this a problem? Well, there are a number of reasons. One, the city is named Athens. It's named after Athena. So rejecting Athena undermines the self-understanding of the city. Right? Athenians thought of themselves as like Athena's people. That's made them special. And so to reject that would not only sort of have a effect on how Socrates might or might not worship, but ultimately have an effect on how he relates to the city and its institutions and its customs as a whole. It's sort of subversive, especially if you keep in mind that in ancient Greece or ancient Athens, there was absolutely no separation between the government and religion, right? The people in charge of the religious affairs of the Athenians were the government of Athens, right? So if Socrates is not believing in this, then that's a problem, right? Think of the discussion, the Euthyphro, the Pan-Athenian processions and things like that. Okay, so that's the first charge. The second charge, corrupting the youth. What does that mean? Well, it all turns on what counts as corruption. Essentially, the complaint is that Socrates is teaching people to act like him, to go around and ask questions all day, and to challenge people to explain themselves, and to show people that they don't know what it is they think that they know, and on and on. When they say that Socrates is corrupting the youth, this is what they mean. So that Socrates is having people imitate him. People are going around and acting like Socrates. So essentially they're saying he's a bad influence on the youth. The facts of the matter are not really under dispute. It is the case that Socrates had people imitate him. It is the case that he had this little entourage of well-to-do young people that followed him around. The question that the apology raises is imitating Socrates corruption, or is it improvement? Is Socrates improving the lives of these young people, or is he making their lives worse? The charge that Antius, Meletus, and Lycon make when they put him on trial assumes that in acting like Socrates, you are making your life worse. Socrates' defense is going to have to be that in acting like Socrates, you are making your life better. And this is going to get us to one of the central questions in the Apology, which is, does Socrates and sort of the Socratic philosophy that he represents improve one's life, or does it ruin one's life? You might think it's fairly straightforward, at least from Plato's perspective. You might be like, well, obviously Plato thinks that Socrates improves everybody's life. If everyone was like Socrates, the world would be a better place. Duh. But even for Plato, it's not that simple. Because while it might be good for Socrates to be Socrates, and it might be good for Plato to be influenced by Socrates, ask yourself this: what if everybody was like Socrates? What if the whole city stopped working and just spent the whole day going around asking people questions and discussing things with each other, but nothing else was getting done? The soldiers weren't training for war, the merchants weren't bringing in food and trade from across the sea, everyone just sat around talking. Well, in that case, you can see, well, it would be a problem. And this is something to think about, because it's quite clear that, Plato thinks that Socrates is admirable. And it's quite clear that Plato himself, chose to live a life that was highly influenced by Socrates. And it's quite clear that, essentially Socrates is the hero of the Apology. But what's not quite clear, and what you should think about, is whether all those things being the case, if it isn't also the case that he was corrupting the youth in a way. Ask yourself, everybody acted like Socrates, what would life be like? What would Athens be like? And then you'll begin to see some of the deeper questions that the Apology raises and doesn't directly answer. And I guess you could say that the question is, even on the assumption that that Socrates is not corrupting the youth, does that mean that philosophy should be practiced by all people at all times? Or should it only be practiced by some people at some times? And if so, where do we draw the line? And I don't think there's a clear answer in the Apology. I'm not sure that Plato wants to give us an answer in the Apology, but I am quite confident that he wants us to think about it, and thinking about the charges against Socrates and what they mean, how they can seem plausible and defensible, even to someone quite sympathetic to Socrates and quite, let's say, educated in their own right, like Aristophanes was. Aristophanes was a brilliant person. He was not an idiot. He was not uptight or prudish, right? He's actually quite crass, and most of his jokes are dirty jokes, right? Even someone like Aristophanes was smart enough to take Socrates seriously enough to write a whole play about him, but also to take him seriously enough to worry about the effect of Socrates on the city. And that's something that we should think about.